Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Solem, a professor of geography at Texas State University. I also serve as senior advisor for geography education at the American Association of Geographers. I'm delighted to provide a keynote to complement Alaric's and Margaret's very fine presentations. Um, the topic for my presentation is powerful geography. This is an initiative here in the United States that is building on some of the work in recent years of the GeoCapabilities project. Um, I'll provide a little bit of context for why we are taking on this project here in the United States. So without further ado, let's get started. There we are. Um, Earlier this year, we learned from our National Assessment of Educational Progress that students aren't making progress in geographic education. What you're looking at here are trend data for the NAEP geography assessment just within one of the content domains, environment and society. Um, Quickly, what NAEP does is provides us with a nationally representative uh, assessment of what students know and are able to do in different school subject areas, including geography. There have been 5 NAEP geography assessments, the first in 1994 and the most recent in 2018. And as we can see from this graph, that scores in the environment and society content domain have declined with every assessment. This is certainly disheartening as a geography educator. And we need to probe into some of the reasons why this is occurring and why it matters. But just as an illustration of the NAEP geography assessment, here are a couple of items that were released to the public to help illustrate the nature of knowledge assessed by NAEP. And again, these examples are for 8th grade students. This item asks students to review this map and then answer the question here: what are the major beneficial effects of the summer monsoon on the economy of India? Of course, we know the answer is D. Here's another example which students interpret a political cartoon and then respond, a free response: name one positive impact of offshore drilling, name one negative impact of offshore drilling, and one way to help save oil reserves for future generations. So the environment and society content domain assesses students' knowledge of how humans interact with the environment, modify the environment, and are affected by the environment. And again, scores in 2018 were lower than they were in 1994, the original NAEP assessment year. So a 25-year record of decline in this major area of our discipline. I'd like to look at some additional NAEP data, just to provide a little bit of context of where we are in the United States with regard to status of geography education and the quality of learning in schools. Was interested in finding out the percentages and characteristics of students performing at NAEP Basic, Proficient, and Advanced. Now, again, by way of background, these are achievement levels that NAEP sets to establish some kind of criteria of what it means to be geographically proficient and literate. Students who perform at the basic level on a NAEP assessment, that means they only have partial mastery of knowledge and skills that's fundamental to become proficient. So prerequisite knowledge in a sense. Students who perform at the proficient level, that represents solid academic performance and competency over challenging subject matter. And then NAEP Advanced is superior performance expected of top students in other industrialized nations of the world. So let's take a look at how students of different backgrounds fall into these 3 proficiency levels. Here we're looking at some data from the perspective of gender, percentages of students at each grade level at the 8th grade. Uh, Relative to male students, we can see there is no difference between male and female students at below basic, but that at the basic level, there are significantly higher percentages of female students, whereas at the proficient level, there are significantly lower percentages of female students. And at the advanced level, the percentage of female students is significantly lower relative to male students. Let's take a look at some data on the basis of race and ethnicity. Again, and I should have mentioned that this isn't just for environment society, this is overall composite geography scores on the NAEP assessment. Okay, so the most recent year, we can see that relative to white students, there are significantly higher percentages of Black, Hispanic, and students of 2 or more races at the below basic level. At the basic level, relative to white students, we can see that percentages of Black students are significantly lower. At the proficient level, the same pattern, significantly lower percentages of Black, Hispanic, and students of 2 or more races. Again, this is relative to white students. And at the advanced level, the percentage of Hispanic students is significantly lower than white students. And statistically speaking, Black students round to 0 at the advanced level. Now, NAEP doesn't make any in its reports on the geography assessment and in other subject areas. NAEP does not offer explanations for achievement disparities and achievement gaps, nor does it make any judgments about the significance of the knowledge assessed. And that's what I would like to turn this discussion now. NAEP is measuring knowledge that is consistent with national standards in geography. I think it'd be fair to say that national standards are characteristic of powerful knowledge. They set teaching and learning goals for students at the 4th, 8th, and 12th grade. And so over that 25-year period of NAEP assessments, we have seen very little progress made in students' engagement with and learning of powerful knowledge. So let's think for a little bit about why this matters, because again, NAEP doesn't make any opine on that question. And I'd like to comment on why this matters from the perspective of the GeoCapabilities project, with which I've been involved since 2012. And here you can see some of the team. I think many of these faces will be familiar to you. But I know Alaric and Margaret, they've talked a bit, very, very clearly about powerful knowledge and powerful pedagogies and its significance. But I don't want to overlap too much with their commentaries. But just in brief, thinking about why it matters for students to have access to geography in schools. GeoCapabilities project advanced this argument that geography is a form of powerful knowledge, and powerful knowledge has qualities that enhance human capability. For that reason, students have pedagogic rights to access powerful knowledge in schools. And when students have a lack of an opportunity to learn powerful knowledge, we view that in terms of capabilities deprivation. They're less capable, they enjoy fewer freedoms and opportunities to achieve well-being in life because they lack geography's powerful knowledge. They do not possess it in Alaric's terms. And so moving forward from here in the United States, I think we can look at these NAEP data as a form of capabilities deprivation. And we've had 25 years of NAEP reports making it clear that students, and especially students of color, do not possess geography's powerful knowledge in very large numbers. Um, I like to think of this in terms of a social justice issue. And it's time that we address it and do something about it. So, what ought we do? What should we do? Um, I think I'd like to focus a little more now on this question of access and how do we expand access to powerful knowledge in schools. Um, and to set up that discussion, I'd like to take a look at a quote from our colleague David Lambert. It says, there has arguably never been a time when children are in more need of exposure to the best of what we know. And by the best of what we know, David's referring to powerful knowledge. But the next two questions here I think are really interesting and key. How do we select powerful knowledge for students to learn? And what do we do to ensure that expert knowledge is accessible and meaningful to all children? How do we position powerful disciplinary knowledge in relation to practical everyday knowledges so they do not occupy entirely different worlds? So, what do we mean then by access? I think one way, and perhaps the most common way, we think about access is in terms of numbers and quantity. Um, Numbers of uh, schools that offer geography in the first place. And moving forward, perhaps our efforts should focus on expanding geography courses across the K-12 spectrum, across primary, tertiary education, primary, secondary education, excuse me, adding more geography requirements to the school curriculum. Well, that sounds nice, but here's the reality. You're looking at a graphic that identifies challenges to providing K-12 geography instruction in the United States. This comes from a report by the United States Government Accountability Office. Well, geography is a fairly weak and marginalized subject area in most states in this country. Challenges to providing geography instruction, the number one challenge being pressure to emphasize other subjects, particularly subjects that are part of high stake assessments. But there are many additional challenges. The perception of geography. Key education stakeholders do not understand the relevance and importance of geography education and skills. Teacher preparation is a challenge. Teachers often do not have a background in geography or receive training that prepares them to teach the subject. Instructional materials, high quality engaging textbooks and lessons are not always available to students in classrooms. Technology, access to geographic technology in the classroom can be limited due to resource and infrastructure constraints. Another challenge is external support. Geography education is not always supported by education stakeholders such as parents and curriculum committees. And then finally, resources. Resource constraints limit the ability to provide technology, hands-on learning, and other opportunities in K-12 geography education. So, colleague Roger Downs, in an article published in the GA's journal, Geography, a couple of years ago, he noted that the expectation of geographers, some geographers, that we will have systemic change and we could achieve systemic change in geography education by expanding requirements to teach geography, adding more geography courses, is a pipe dream. And I think when you look at the context of the GAO's report on challenges in geography education, I have to agree with Roger. It may be possible to add geography requirements and courses in localities where the political will exists, but I don't think the subject, unfortunately, has the clout to do it at a broad scale. Maybe someday it will. So access in terms of numbers and quantity, I think is not necessarily the right focus moving forward to enact improvements in what young people know and are able to do. I think Roger is correct in his article when he says we need to think about piecemeal reforms. They're not very sexy, but over time they may be cumulatively more effective. Um, Access, though, is also discussed in terms of cognitive access. Um, we've had, for the past 25 years, voluntary national standards for geography. This document provides content and performance exemplars that represent what every young American should know and be able to do in geography. That's actually the subtitle of the national standards. When you take a look into the document, you will find that these exemplars are very carefully sequenced to provide learning benchmarks at the 4th grade, at the 8th grade, and the 12th grade. And the writers of these exemplars drew upon work in the learning sciences and in spatial cognition to come up with that sequence of increasingly complex subject matter. Now, I think we benefit from having these standards to show that geography can be represented in schools in the form of challenging teaching and learning goals. And the cognitive perspective, I think, can help ensure that on the one hand, we're not boring kids by pitching material below their abilities, but we also got to be careful that we're not frustrating them either with material that surpasses their abilities or doesn't properly account for their prior content knowledge and exposure. And so I think that's a useful perspective, but I don't think as a form of curriculum guidance, Geographer Life is really attuned to the everyday realities that teachers face in schools. And that's something that I'll be turning to here next with some examples. So access, then, a final way or a third way that we need to think about access, given some of what we're learning in assessment studies such as NAEP that illustrate racial and socioeconomic achievement gaps. I think we also need to think about access in terms of from sociocultural perspective. So to buttress that argument, I'd like you to consider an excerpt from a study of NAEP data using US history assessment data. And there was a multi-level statistical modeling of the NAEP US history data set that suggests social cultural factors are contributing to achievement gaps in history. And here's an excerpt. Research suggests that the official history canon with an emphasis on white males is not representative of the diverse population of US schools. So lacking historical positionality beyond a marginalized or the victim, non-white students are more likely to look upon such a narrative with skepticism and dissonance. Consequently, they find learning history and social studies boring, inversely affecting their motivation to learn historical material. So in our social studies and geography classrooms, what geography are we asking students to learn? And perhaps is there some socio-cultural barrier to learning that makes students of color and female students less motivated to learn the subject, which might be then reflected in NAEP data that shows disparities relative to white male students? It's an interesting question, and we need to marshal a lot of research activity around it, because right now we don't really have a definitive answer. I do think, though, when you given the findings of the US history NAEP data, that it's something that we can't ignore, and we have to think about access in geography education from a sociocultural perspective. And that also just represents the contemporary reality of teaching. The National Academies issued a report earlier this year on changing expectations for the K-12 teacher workforce. This has implications both for practicing teachers as well as for initial teacher education. those of us who are responsible for preparing future generations of teachers need to understand this context. Some of the big findings in this report are that teachers are increasingly expected to set teaching goals that require improved disciplinary content knowledge and culturally relevant pedagogy, while preparing students for the workforce by helping them apply content to novel problems and situations. Another expectation, teachers are increasingly expected to create equitable learning environments that account for the greater diversity of students and the experiences they bring into schools. And teachers are increasingly expected to select subject matter and create instructional materials that support implementation of new curriculum standards in the states. So, what can we do to help geography teachers who will be working in this context for the foreseeable future? I think we need to try some new things in terms of changing the curriculum guidance that's available to teachers in these states, in these local jurisdictions, in a way that helps them respond to these expectations and challenges. And that's what we're trying to do with a new initiative called Powerful Geography. Powerful Geography presents the argument that before we focus on the what and how questions of education, what should we teach? How should we teach? Before we get to that point, we need to be thinking about precursors, other inputs to inform that curriculum making. It begins, as GeoCapabilities would advocate, with the focus on students. Who are the students we teach? Powerful Geography response to that question is a focus on acquiring data about the student context, helping teachers acquire that data. And in specific terms, data on students' life and career aspirations. And we've designed a survey that teachers can implement as part of their class preparation regimen to learn about who their students are, for example, by asking them about their life and career aspirations. And with that information in hand, we would then provide teachers with data, another set of data, which is represented by the second arrow. And this is examples of geography concepts, tools, and applications in the world of professional geography, based on interviews with professional geographers who are working in business, government, and non-profit organizations. We asked them what knowledge and skills are useful and important in the context of their work, but also in the context of their civic lives. And then we will then demonstrate for teachers how you can take both of these data sets and align them together to identify the subject matter that will then form the basis of what to teach, and then to look at how professional geographers practice their expertise in different professional settings to provide a real world flavor and context for engaging students in geographic learning activities that help them recognize the relationship between geography and life beyond or after school. And we know that from studies in education, if students recognize that relationship, if we convey the relevance and applications of geography, we know from educational research in science education that do these things, that it fosters positive attitudes towards science, interest in science, confidence to do science, perceived utility of science. So in theory, if we can achieve that same result in the context of geography education, we are making geography more accessible to more diverse groups of students, potentially encouraging them to continue studying geography in college and consider futures in a career sense in which geography can help them achieve what they aspire to be and do in the future. And so by measuring the impact of this project, we'll be turning to teachers who are trained in the methodology. Do they view it as an improvement over existing curriculum guidance? Are they able to work with the aspirations and workforce data sets uh, for inclusive curriculum making? And when their materials and their powerful geography lessons are introduced to students, do we see gains in students' affect, their attitudes toward geography and geography careers? Those are the measures by which we will need to be uh, attending to in terms of understanding the impact of this project. And there's just some of the methodology summarized there. So we received recently a couple of grants from the U.S. National Science Foundation to implement this work, and initially in the states of Texas and California. So this is a multi-year effort, and hopefully we'll have some positive and encouraging results to share over time. Uh, and especially, I hope we can share it in person and not always in Zoom in the near future. So I would like to encourage you to contact me. I have two email addresses for Texas State and for the AAG that you see there. And if you're interested in learning more about powerful geography and any of the other projects that we have ongoing at the National Center for Research in Geography Education, please visit the website that you see there. Um, and I appreciate this chance to talk to you about how we are trying to make geography more accessible to more students in more locations, and why it's important that we pursue this so that we can expand opportunities to learn geography for all students. Thanks for considering my remarks, and I hope to hear from you. Bye-bye.